Welcome back to another edition of Close Mode, the Enterprise Sales Show. I'm Brian Dietmeyer, CEO of Close Strong. And today I'm really lucky to be here with Ruby Raley, who I've had a few conversations with lately. And Ruby's had a bunch of positions that I think really make our conversation even more relevant. She's been a VP of Sales and Alliances, advises tech startups on their go-to-market, has been in product marketing, has been a CIO in healthcare and supply chain. So yeah, I feel really fortunate to be here today. And Ruby, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. I'm honored to be here. I love your sessions.
Thanks. So we were, the subject of our talk. We've changed it a little bit, and it's a couple weeks ago we were talking, and you said you felt the demand engine was broken, and that felt really truthful to me. And I was just speaking with a tech sales VP the other day who said we're in a demand neutral or demand negative market, which is really depressing. But I have an opening question for you. I think a lot of that is true. How the hell did we get here?
I think that we're in a hangover from COVID.
Yeah.
I think when we all went home, marketing had to step it up to get virtual things going. We bought a bunch of tools. We saw some initial success, and we bought a bunch of tools. We didn't use all of them, and but the worst thing we did was we spammed our buyers into fatigue. So when you're talking to buyers, I ask this question of everyone I network with: do you answer cold phone calls? And they all say no. It doesn't matter whether they're a seller, a buyer, an HR person, a retired person. Nobody answers a phone call from someone they don't know anymore. So it's getting harder and harder to get that breakthrough moment that you need in sales.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's interesting that I've worked personally with my company, hired two different demand gen folks who both came back with similar comments. Like we ended up, cutting off the thing after a few months, you need to ramp up and let's try it. And they're both saying, none of my stuff is working. Like they were really honest about it. Like I used to throw the stuff at the wall and
Yeah.
it would stick and it's not sticking. So I'm wondering, yeah, when we talk about things that came out in the last few years, let's talk specifically about some of the kind of demand gen stuff that you see out there that isn't
Yeah.
working as well as it did, in a market where the market was expanding, right?
Right. Well, obviously there's a bunch of tools out there for identifying people. So we have all kinds of people that generate lists. And as we dig into that, the first thing consultants tell you, and I do it too, is what's your ICP? What's your ideal customer persona or profile? And we need that to arm these automated tools. So then we go get this list. And then we write a sequence using some materials that marketing gave us typically because we're salespeople. So marketing gives us some skeletons. We write some stuff up, and then we know from best practices from a lot of firms that I'm not going to mention, but I bet that your audience follows most of them. They'll tell you, oh, you got to connect on LinkedIn. You got to send the email, then you got to call. So we set up these multi-touch sequences and then we run them. I think we in sales are a little lazy. I'm talking to one salesperson right now who seems to be a good person. I actually answered her on LinkedIn and she keeps sending me emails as if she did not see
Yeah.
that answer. So I think these automation tools, like sales is setting it up and then letting it run and is not really checking the results. And that just like it just made me feel even stronger that I don't want to engage with someone because I engaged and I didn't even get the courtesy of an answer. I just got more spam email.
Yeah, it's interesting because there was a demand gen company who did I think email marketing or something or cold calling and I kept coming back to them with the same question, which is, hey, are you willing to
Mhm.
do a rev share, a risk share agreement? And then 2 weeks later, I would get the next sequence that never responded, actually. And I'm like, wait, you guys are in the business of demand gen. You're killing me. You're killing yourself. So yeah, and
Right,
it's funny
right.
too because I was speaking with a buyer the other day, and maybe a lot of people listening will recognize this as well. Like saying, "I now know when I'm getting sequenced," which is kind of the point you just made, and of the kind of
Exactly.
over reliance on it.
Yeah, so maybe it's not just fatigue. Maybe the buyers have seen our patterns so much now that they're smarter than they used to be,
Yeah.
and we've got to step our game up in order to get back in. So there's that. And I don't want to say that all tools are useless because I still remain very intrigued by the intent tools
Yes.
that purportedly tell you buyer intent. I have mixed results with them, but I definitely think that there's value in these tools, but something still is not giving us the results we need.
I think that's a really good point, and I'm glad you bring it up. That I don't think any of it's useless. It's just not as effective as it was. It's that again, we're throwing it at the wall, and it's not sticking. You made an interesting point to me about sort of your pipe then and now. That I'd love to hear you talk about your view on that, and especially as it relates to people listening, watching, to say, does this sound familiar? So talk to me about what shifted in pipeline.
Yeah. So, when I took the VP of sales role, it was a turnaround role and I rapidly got it fixed and we're sailing along. And I can remember going into a QBR, trying to pull numbers out of our tool and thinking, oh, this is going to look really bad. And I pulled my pipe for the rest of the year. This is like the end of Q1. We were still getting the year started. Had a 6X pipe. And I just had this big, like, expansive moment of shit, I got this,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
But then in recent years, I would be like, telling the guys, you got to quote this in CPQ. You got to do this. You got to like put some numbers in because I couldn't even get a 2X pipe, Brian. It's like I would, my pipe went from here to here. And then, like, when you started really analyzing it, then you start seeing a lot of early stage stuff, right? And then you start looking at some of the late stage deals, and are some of these the ones that sales has been kicking down the road? Like, how many of these can really work? And what you end up with is a punch list that is a must do list. Like, there's no room for a mistake.
yeah. Yeah. So I wonder. This is a thing that's in my head, and you and I were speaking earlier about some primary research we just completed, and the question for me that's in everyone's mind is, okay, we still need to impact this stuff in 2024. So a lot of the old stuff is not as effective as it was, and so I'm just wondering what you see or what you're hearing as like what given these shifts, what the heck should we be doing in 2024? And then I'll share with you a little bit about what we just learned in our
Yeah,
primary research. But yeah,
yeah,
what do you think? What should we
yeah,
be doing? You and I have kind of crapped all over what isn't working and how scary the world is.
yeah.
Everybody knows this.
Well, I'd like to blame marketing and tell marketing to give me a whole bunch more leads. But
Yeah.
the truth is, it's halfway through the year. Marketing is going to help me, but what they're starting now is probably going to yield value for me early next year or
Yeah.
the end of the year where I can't close it. So I got to be honest that the way to succeed lies in my own hands and in my own team's hands. It's not outside, it's not marketing's issue, it's not product's issue, it's on me. And what I've got to do is figure out what I have a line of sight to close. And I've got to put the plan together to be on top of that, make sure everyone on the team knows the plays they're running, knows how to deal with the objections, and is on top of it. The the next thing I can try to do if I can't get to my number with my line of sight is look at my existing customers or my named accounts that aren't active and what can I do to get them active? What can I do where I already have a customer that'll take my call? That's I've got to get pragmatic. I've got to get practical. I've got to get what I can control, and starting with what I can see, and then what can I reach in one step or two steps. That's where my focus has got to be to win.
Yeah. So much of that resonates. I was just speaking to one of our advisors the other day, who's also an industry analyst, who said, close rates in 2000 were 46%. Close rates in 2023 are 47%. And so that first of all is frightening. We spent a lot of money on a lot of stuff over those years, and
Yeah.
win rates are still about flat and less than the flip of a coin. And what he also told me is that in the same survey over the most previous 10 years, generating top of the funnel has been the number one investment for all these same companies. So his point is like, it's not working. It's not, it's been the number one priority. Win
Yeah.
rates are still flat. And his argument, you just talked about line of sight. And his argument is it's what's in your funnel right now, right? That's if we're
Yeah.
gonna yet have impact in 2024, we've got to convert a much higher percent of than 46 to 47% of what's in our funnel. I spoke to a VP of sales the other day who said not only that, it's the stuff that's in the middle of your pipe and it's the middle of your team. Your top performers are already going to get you what they're going to get you. The bottom performers aren't going to do it. And so that to me was a kind of a pretty cool prescription. It's like middle of the pipe,
Yeah.
middle of your team. I'm just wondering how you feel about that.
That's absolutely right on the money. And I have an insight that I got last year that I had really been missing because I'd been working with a group of pretty successful sellers who were pretty good at their numbers and pretty good at reading their accounts and their ops and what was happening or not. And then my role changed and I got to deal with a bunch of others. And what I realized was skills are not even across the organization. And as a VP of sales and the CRO, you don't always get that because you're not on ride-alongs with everyone and you probably aren't listening to every single call. And what seems to be missing is some of those old skills, Brian, that you and I probably spent lots of time on in the past and maybe we kind of missed. And some of these are setting up the compelling event,
Yes.
like getting the ROI lined up, setting the sequence of events and really making sure that you lined up who has to approve this in the portfolio committee, what's procurement's processes, all these sort of old school things. Not everyone really understands what that means. So they all can talk the talk, I
Yeah.
think, but like when it comes to really like implementing it and understanding how to navigate it, that maybe isn't as good as you think it is
Yes.
in your organization.
Yeah. So many thoughts you spark in my brain. I'd mentioned this primary research we just did in concert with SAMA,
Hmm.
Strategic Account Management Association, and we broke it out. Top performers were people who were closing at 60% rate and had all beat their sales goals last year. And the bottom percent were at a 40% close rate or below and missed their goals. And it's interesting that we took a look, well, what are you doing and how are you doing it and where are you spending your time? And it's interesting that the number one and number two points that came up for folks who were in the top percent was coaching, right? They say we're doing it. And not only coaching, I think the average percentage of pipe that's coached right now is 5%, right? And these groups were at a much higher percent.
Wow.
And it wasn't just the coaching, it was the quality and the rigor, and the same thing happened with if they made investments in training or they made investments in tech tools, they had a ton more rigor. And do people have to use it, right? Is it measured? Is it that sort of thing? And it just sort of blew me away that they're saying, yes, we're making investments in these things, but we're now requiring use. And I think about, you and I discussed this outreach paper that just came out about sales has a process problem, right? In the expanding
Right.
market, process, whatever, who cares? But now they're saying, no, we've got to. And this is what I just saw from these top performers. We're looking at stuff in the pipe and we're coaching earlier, as early as we can in the process to start setting up the close. And just again, a reaction to that. We just dug through the first draft of this research. So you're the first I've had to talk to about it.
Coaching earlier in the process really resonates with me because if you're sitting on top of, let's say you've got the ability to take an ongoing run rate with an existing account and make it a seven-figure deal by moving them to your cloud or converting them into a new model or signing them up for a subscription or whatever, and you're not on top of their renewal dates, you're not on top of their volumes, you're not on top of like their past buying processes, by the time you run through the phone it in sales cycle, okay, you got the solutions engineer to demo it, you got product to give you the latest features and functions, you ran all that, you may have missed a key date. Like they might have already renewed for next year, or they might have missed a budget process where they needed to go to the portfolio committee and forecast their own expenditure. So now you're really, excuse my French, screwed,
Yeah.
because you weren't on top of it early enough to see, how their world lays out against your world, so you could match those milestones
Yeah.
up and nail it, right?
Yeah. So, and that wasn't bad French. My French has been worse. And there's a thing that you call like sayings like that I'm fascinated. I can't remember
Yeah.
what you call them, but I always look them up. And this is one I need to look up. Where did excuse my French come from? Because it's
Yeah.
interesting. It's fascinating
Yeah.
to me. So here,
Yeah.
I asked you at the outset, what the hell happened, and I think one thing we missed that I've been seeing a lot, and I'm sure you have, and everybody listening, watching, that buyer, the buyer's journey has gotten more complex. There's more people involved. It's committee decisions. Because of
Yeah.
that complexity, no decision is on the rise. And there's also all that uncertainty out there, which is then driving those buying committees to say, let's hold off on making commitments. What's the impact in, like, I feel like that's such a fundamental shift in 2024. What, any sense of how we might address that buyer complexity in this uncertain market to help them move forward?
I think this is one of the areas where sales and marketing have to partner to really deal with this, because we're all getting these stats and these findings, and big time analysts are saying that there's not one economic buyer anymore.
Right.
There's multiple, right? There's multiple stakeholders in the decision. I've had procurement tell me no after I had everyone else lined up and they stuck it. So, things you think are just check boxes are not anymore. So, I think we are struggling in sales. And you mentioned the sales process is broken. I think that's exactly right, because I don't think we have reinvented our selling motions across our
Yes.
stage
Yes.
to match to the buyer world. For example, buyers can go to a G2, they can go to other sites, they can look you up against your competitor. In fact, buyers today can go get Chat GPT or Gemini or Bard and say, okay, compare this company to that company, what would you recommend? Now, the AI engines always put the caveat at the end for legal protection. So they're going to say, you can't rely on me, situations vary, all this, but they're going to give you a side by side layout, right, of these things. G2 certainly will. And you may have been only talking to two of five recommended people. You might stop talking to two and go pick up a vendor who's listed four or five on that finding. Now, if I'm the salesperson from vendor one or two, I'm going, what happened?
Right.
I had all this conversation going on, and all of a sudden I'm ghosted. What happened? And I don't know that now all of a sudden they did some sort of research and discovered I got another competitor in the mix that they're spinning up on while I'm waiting, thinking everything's fine and all that. And I'm reporting, this, we had this fun conversation too recently, like the classic phone the same message in on the spreadsheet every week for the punch list for
Yeah.
closing.
Yeah.
Like, waiting on sponsor to return phone call. Spoke to sponsor, everything is fine. And then you start looking, and it's the same answer because they don't have a new answer. So we have this tendency not to realize what went wrong, and we're just riding the course thinking everything's okay. So there's just a delay, and might not be. You might
Yeah.
you might be in trouble.
Yeah, it's, well, you said something. You say a lot of things always that get my brain working. But one of the multiple things you've said today and in previous conversations is that, like, we look at the sales process and the sales stages, and we're not tweaking them enough for the current environment. And
Right.
I had written a note a few moments ago that it's might be a new playbook for 2024. Some of that might be resurrecting some things that I think you said earlier that we kind of stopped doing in a market that was a little thicker and a little heavier than, not as lean as it is
Right.
now. And I feel like sellers at the highest level need to start being more prescriptive. Another terrible stat that came out from CSO Insights, a buyer study they started years ago, is that buyers said that sellers are ninth out of 10 places they go for insight. So, and that's almost dead last because they're not, and that's not necessarily the seller's fault. Are they getting what they need? But the good news was buyers said, I will talk to them. I'll see Ruby, but Ruby's got to have a good reason to talk to me. And it seems to me, this is another area I'd love your impact that or input. Buyers are struggling with making these very complex decisions in this uncertain environment. I think sellers are still coming in and saying, I need to understand your decision process. Their decision process is broken. They are struggling with it. It's also, I feel like this is a core skill for 2024 in the last 6 months of the year, is helping buyers navigate these crazy, complex decisions. We know, I often use the metaphor of doctors that buyers are like veterinarians. Like a snake, a bird, and a camel all walk into their office and they're dealing with these different critters all day long, where we as sellers are not only neurosurgeons, we're spine specialist neurosurgeons, and how to buy, like we're selling, I don't know, firewall protection software. We've watched thousands of customers buy this over many, many years. And thinking of what marketing can pull together, what's a really good holistic way to help guide a buyer's decision, not necessarily toward your stuff, but provide that prescriptive help to go from how are you making your decision to, look, I'm going to share with you some best practices about how people are making complex decisions in today's market. And another area I'd love your reaction to.
Yeah, well, back in the day when I was biz dev more than selling, people would drag me in because of credibility. So the seller would say, hey, come with me to this meeting in case the customer has any question. My role was, because I had recently been a CIO, was to sit across from the leader and the customer and show them that I had empathy and I understood them, right? I'd walked a mile in their shoes. So that built credibility for us. And then it typically opened the conversation up. But what I see now is we have one process that we use for every single customer. We have the discovery questions and we ask everyone these questions. And then our solutions engineers don't trust sales. So they ask them another set of questions. And then you finally get the demo and you finally get the price point and you finally get whatever. But my recent experience is small, medium organizations have no patience for that anymore.
Right.
They want to get on the first call. They want to know exactly what you can do for them and exactly what a price point is for budget so they can weed you out or keep you in, and you don't have 3 or 4 or 5 meetings to go through these things in this prescribed order.
Yes.
And so if you can't sense and adapt, or if you haven't already sense this customer is this kind of customer, they're probably going to buy this way, and you already kind of re-steered, then you're going to mess up and you're going to annoy the customer. I have been in this situation where I had to follow my company's process, and I had the head of procurement for a global systems integrator who wanted to buy our stuff telling me I wasn't going to make the cut because I wouldn't do it their way.
Right.
And I've got my legal and my solutions engineers telling me, well, we don't believe this is real and we're not going to do this. And literally, I could see a multi-million-dollar deal swirl down the drain because I couldn't adapt to the buyer. And the buyer was in a rush and they weren't going to mark up an agreement. They weren't going to go through steps. They had this plan, and if I couldn't go with them on their model, I was out. And guess what? I was out. I never got back in again. The best I could get out of procurement was, well, if the other people fall out, we might consider you again.
Yes.
Like as a seller, I felt you have no idea. Like my husband's asking me what's wrong with you. It's like I just lost my whole year.
Yes.
Because I couldn't adapt to the customer.
Yeah. There's, as we look toward maybe, again, what works, I think having that flexibility and that kind of customized and prescribing a little bit more, because people will meet with us more.
Mhm.
That's the point that came out of that buyer research, but we got to rethink we can't come in with the old discovery. What's keeping you awake at night? Blah blah blah. And I've blogged a little
Yeah.
bit about guided discovery. If we're bringing value to them through guided discovery, we're asking questions. It's really getting them to think. And I've spoken to hundred sales leaders between the blog and other interviews we've done over the last year. Everybody's frustrated with discovery. It's like, and that's one of those old that's new again. Like we have to execute discovery, but to the point you're making, we have to execute discovery in a way that's guided. It's maybe helping them make their decision more, but we've got to rethink some of these old skills in 2024, and some of it is getting back to the basics, but maybe in a different way that reflects this market.
Yeah, I think you nailed it. So, when we were doing the e-commerce transformation in the 2000s, we were talking about mass customization,
Yes,
right?
yeah,
That you could actually provide a unique experience to an individual customer when you are selling to millions of people.
yep,
And Amazon is the example we all hold up, but Apple does a good job as well, and so do a whole bunch of other people. That is what the power of some of these new tools like AI and some of these things can do. They can take the things that these really top guys do that they don't even understand how they do, and we can start seeing how we can be a more flexible and adaptive organization using the tools in that way. And AI is a very good example of how it could help us, because we could go load up scenarios and we could have sellers ask questions like here's my scenario. I've got this a company, they're a gaming company, they're based in Vegas, they've got a problem, they're coming in, we got cold calls, so they're probably talking to a bunch of people. They're pretty small. Here's like, can you tell me how big they are? Do you know their IT budget? Because a really good researcher can often find all these things, and all these tools we bought, like Zoom Info has stuff like
yeah,
that in it, and a whole bunch of the others do, and even Crunchbase has it, and so you could probably go find that. But would that seller go find it for that deal? Probably not. But
yes,
the AI engine could bring it to them
yep,
and then say, hey, based on this, they're going to have a tight budget constraint. They're probably not a process oriented company. You're going to need to cut some process steps out. You're going to need to establish credibility and really understand they're probably pretty smart tech people because they write gaming software. So, how are you going to be on that first call to get that trusted advisor, establish this, and guide the conversation in such a way that you get to the next meeting and you meet their expectations and they like you?
yeah. Yep. Yeah, I think you nailed it, and you just morphed into my final question was about, all right. So what's out there that's new that we can yet do in 2024 to make a difference, and that the work you just talked about using those tools for and the AI tools is prepping us to come in with more prescriptive, more value added stuff early. And again, the research in my real life experience shows they will slow down. They will slow down a little bit if we're doing things that are adding value. So yeah, you talked
Yep.
about some I so now that we're into that, like new tools that are out there that are working, and you talked about kind of some skills coaching stuff that you're seeing that is making a difference.
Yeah. Yeah, so I'm on a personal mission to learn more about AI in sales. So I've been sniffing around everywhere, joining up in things. I've talked to multiple startups who are actually building tools for sellers using AI. And they do tend to fall into a couple of buckets. And the most common one is this coaching bucket that falls into role play, and then like right adjacent to it is the customer research one, like that actually can either help you write the account plan or help you research the customer for that first call. Those those are really pretty good first steps, because these are things that, to your point about the middle of our bell curve of sellers, maybe they're phoning it in. Maybe they've got a large territory, not many
Yeah.
highly productive accounts. And in that large territory, there's no way, no matter how diligent they are, that they can be armed with everything about every account.
Yep. Yeah.
And if they just got a bunch of new accounts, maybe they inherited crap from the guy who didn't put anything in Salesforce or whatever. So definitely real value there. But let's go back to our pragmatic lens. Like you and I are headed in to our QBR with our chief revenue officer. And what does he care about? He does not care about our AI tools. He does not care about our coaching strategy. He cares about our number.
Yeah.
So we've got to make sure we're getting help on these deals.
Yep.
And I'm really intrigued about AI engines that can help in deal coaching.
Yeah. And you and I have had this discussion about separating. I'm finding that people think of AI and deal coaching as monolithic, where there's skills coaching, which is this role play stuff, and account intelligence, which is what you talked about. And then there's also deal
Right.
coaching, which is I don't want to go too far into this because this is your podcast, but that's the business we're in is scaling deal
Yep.
coaching, right? How do you compete against this competitor? What's the best way to configure your solutions? Those sort of things, and that again, we know that when deals are coached, again, more research that the companies who drive their percentage of their pipe coaching up are getting 2x win rate improvement over people who don't. They're getting 10x in terms of deal quality. They're not just reacting and selling what the customer asked for. They're prescribing something that's better for both parties. The problem again is frontline managers, 5% are doing it because one, by and large, they don't have time. Two, a lot of them don't have skills. We all know the problem. They were all promoted sales rock stars. So they know what made them
Yeah.
successful. So yeah, the question is we have got to, the one thing we know for 2024 is deal coaching will impact win rate. It will impact quality. We've got to scale it. And I think some of that scaling can come from, I interviewed a VP of sales the other day. I said, what do you do when frontline managers don't have time? And he said something very simple that I loved. He said, you got to make time. So that's one part. Managers have got to in 2024 find time. They're still not going to be able to scale it. And that's where AI and deal coaching is coming into play. Like if we could go from, if I were talking to you from 5% of your pipe being coached to 60 or 70, you don't want it all coached, but 60 or 70 points being coached by AI and then delivering that to the frontline managers. And then he or she can then double click on a pre-coached AI deal. This is some of the stuff that's coming out right now. And that is the one thing from all these conversations, our primary research is someone who's a capable coach has got to touch more of the pipe, and the results are there. And so I do think that's definitely a big
Yeah.
issue for this year.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's really kind of how I would like to close this is I think that it's easy to blame the seller is not getting the numbers.
Yeah.
And the numbers show that sellers aren't closing as much. They're not making their number as much as they used to. But what we aren't doing is arming the frontline managers
Yes.
with the tools and the skills to affect the seller's success.
Yep.
And I believe that the sales VPs and or directors, depending on your organization, who are running these teams are not as skilled up as they need to be. And they likely don't have the reach. So we need a combination of educating them and tools so that they can make sure those middle of the road guys pull it in and get success, and they can make a determination faster for the low end of town, whether they're keepers or not.
Yep. Yeah. You just summed it up. This is what I'm learning is 2024, middle of the pipe, the middle of your team, really value added coaching, right? And go from 5 to 60 or 70% of your pipe. And that's what we know will make a difference yet this year. So yeah, you've been super generous with your time and your ideas and your prep for this. You had multiple conversations getting ready because this is such an important subject. And as I've started to do lately, I'm going to ask folks who are watching and listening to Ruby and I, we want to keep the conversation going, like at Ruby, at Brian in the comments on LinkedIn when we post this stuff, and tell us what you agree with, disagree with, what are you seeing that's working. But yeah, I think it's something we're all facing, and we look at this podcast as a kind of community tool for those of us who live in enterprise selling to look at what our peers are doing. So please add to the discussion. And yeah, Ruby, thank you again for all of your time.
Thank you. I really enjoyed it.